Well, the very warmest of welcome backs to Classic Dirt Bike TV, to all of my YouTube subscribers, and of course the brand new subscribers who have recently signed up to view my channel. I hope you find something in here that entertains you with regards to these old classic race bikes. Now, we're quite close to the 11,000 subscribers total now, so thanks to each and every one of you for your support in that department. Okay, coming up next, we have been walking through the paddock again, and we've picked out another selection of those old classic racers from back in the day. So I hope you enjoy this latest selection, and don't forget, if you like what you see, then just hit the like button, or better still, just subscribe to my channel. So once again, thanks for joining me, and let's just jump straight into our first machine. Okay, first up we're going to take a look at Stevie Shaw's 1974 250 Mag Husqvarna. Now, although Stevie's bike's not a full-blown original due to it having those different rear shocks and possibly different wheels, it's still a very nice looking old Swedish racer. Now, these 74 250s, nicknamed of course the Mags, due to them having magnesium engine casings, and these bikes were pretty close to what the 74 works bikes were of their time. Now, they were also designated the MK series of Huskies, and as I remember, these were fueled by a 36mm Bing carburetor, although Stevie appears to have something like a Mikuni fitted on his, and they also had an 8-petal reed valve and a modern motoplat ignition. Well, modern for 1974, that is. Now, the 4-speed gearbox on these 250s was taken straight from the bigger 400 CR bikes, but these Huskies all had a very good reputation for their handling and reliability, and for a 250 was also quite light at just around the 214 pound mark, so it was quite easy to chuck these around the racetrack. Now, if you lived in the USA in 1974 and wanted to buy one of these 250 Husqvarnas such as this, it'd probably cost you around the $1,500 mark, which was of course way more expensive than, say, a comparable Suzuki TM400 at only $1,200, but then that was another factor that affected the sales of these bikes in the US, because these European bikes were always way more expensive than the Japanese machines. Although, having said that, despite the slightly hefty price tag, these were still hugely popular in the USA and in Central Europe, and a good rider sitting astride one of these Swedish Huskies could certainly make it hustle if he had his mind set right. And it's said that Hollywood actor Steve McQueen also had a few of these Huskies in his private bike collection, and of course he certainly helped boost the sales of these bikes when he was seen riding one of them on that Bruce Brown's On Any Sunday movie documentary. Now, on an original 74 Husqvarna, the back end of this bike would be sitting several inches lower than you can see here, and obviously Stevie's lifted the back of the bike up to try and increase that suspension travel. But again, another iconic Husqvarna machine from a time period when Huskies were winning world championships and being ridden by the likes of the great Heikki Mikkola, the Flying Finn, who of course won the 500 World Championships in 1974 on a works version of this bike. But it's still great to see them being raced, and these 74 bikes are still much sought after even here in 2021. Okay, our next bike is Blair Anderson's lovely old 1960s Rickman Metisse Jawa 500, another product of the talented Rickman brothers of Don and Derek Rickman, who built these frame kits which come with the frame, the swing arm, the tank seat and side panels, and then you just fitted whichever engine you specified into the chassis, and in this case a big 4-stroke Jawa 500 lump. And of course then to finish the bike off, you fit your own front and rear suspension, or you could just buy a full rolling chassis ready to pop your destined power plant into. Although if you're looking for power in your old classic racer, then look no further. These old ex-Speedway derived 500 long stroking methanol burning power plants will supply more grunt than you're ever going to need on your old classic racer. Now, as I remember, these big ESO Jawa engines had a total loss oil lubrication system whereby you filled the bike's frame down tube with lubricant, and then it was pumped around the engine by this external oil pump, and then of course the oil then left the motor and went straight onto the ground, hence the name total loss. Although these engines were all designed initially for racing, so the likes of a heavy oil tank and internal pump really wasn't required. Now the gearbox again was separate from the motor, and normally this was the tried and trusted Norton AMC gearbox that was fitted to these scramblers, and as I said, most of these 500 Jawas ran on methanol fuel, usually because it helped eliminate the pinking or pre-detonation in the cylinder. It also increased the power and made the cylinder run cooler, but they could be a bit fiery using methanol, and sometimes owners would just then reconfigure them to run on the much less troublesome and quite tamer ordinary gasoline. But if you wanted torque and lots of it, then this motor had it in bucket loads. Now again, most of the panels, including this fuel tank, were all made from fiberglass, but these Rickman frames are just top quality and made from the finest materials. And if you were to log on to the rickmanmotorcycles.com website, then you would see that they can supply every single part that you need to build one of these classic Rickman race bikes. And if you're not that really handy with the spanners, or don't really have the time to put the kit together, then they'll even build you a complete machine to your own specifications. But this example of Blair's is a nice bike, and in white this time. Although that's the beauty of these Rickman bikes, that you can have them in any colour and whatever engine that takes your fancy. Naturally, of course, as long as you've got sufficient conkers to buy one, that is. So that's another British classic. That's Blair Anderson's lovely Rickman 500 Jawa Metisse. Okay, next up, these were a couple of very nice CZs that I came across at the Cumberland Grand National in 2018. Now these are the bikes of Sam and Phil Nichols, and again another interpretation of what you can do with these vintage Czechoslovakian dirt bikes, as these guys have put their own mark on their bikes by using this black and red paint scheme. Now, I'm not actually sure of what year these bikes will be, but they certainly look like the early 1970s bikes, because there's so many different upgrades and spare parts that you can buy for these bikes these days, and when you've finished rebuilding or even restoring them, they take on a look so much different from the original factory bikes, and it's sometimes hard to actually nail down what year a particular CZ bike is. Now, the process of removing fins from the cylinder barrel appears to be another popular upgrade on these CZ bikes, and whether that assists or degrades the cooling effect, and the jury's still out on that one, although it could be just to shed a few grams of weight from what is already a quite light two-stroke motor. But that said, these power plants are fantastic little engines and well suited for motocross racing. Now they can be a bit rattly when you first initially fire them up, but on the track these motors are just as quick as any equivalent Japanese two-stroker, and some riders would even say that they're even quicker. But it's a great design from a factory that initially began making weapons like guns and other automatic weapons back in the 1900s. Although after the two World War conflicts were finished, demand for guns to kill people took a downturn, and the Czechs armament works decided to move on to making bicycles for the masses, and then eventually moving on to build their first motorcycle in 1936, and of course the rest, they say, is history. But this pair of bikes are quite a nice example of the kind of workmanship that the CZ factory went on to produce, and of course naturally these are both not original bikes because they have different rear shocks, different handlebars and controls and other parts that are not stock items, although essentially the frame, the motor, the tank, the seat, the front forks and the wheels all look like the genuine article. And the icing on this particular cake, of course, is that these are no show bikes, and these were shortly to take part in the 2018 Cumberland Grand National Scramble. Okay, next up, a nice looking British made Greaves Griffin, and I think this could be a 250 model, probably from around the 1970 or maybe even 1971 era. Now these Griffin bikes were of course the replacements for the Greaves Challengers that had that unique banana style leading link front forks, although these Griffins had now changed to these conventional forks made by Seriani. But if you wanted, you could still order your Griffin with the older banana style leading link fork suspension system. Now these Griffin two-stroke motors were quite good power plants and had that big cylinder barrel with those quite substantial cooling fins, and it's said that this design was done to improve the cooling, as a lot of these Griffins were shipped to the USA to be used in desert racing, so cooling was a major factor on these race bikes. Now, as I remember, these 4-speed gearboxes were made by Albion, and they also had an all-metal clutch with, I think it was 7 steel plates and 7 brass plates, and this was all connected to the crank by a primary chain. But despite its unconventional setup, it all worked quite well in practice. Now again, at the rear of the bike, these Griffins had a steel swing arm, which again was very strong and even reasonably light, considering it was made of steel and not the lighter alloy. But overall, these were still very good bikes and were extremely popular for a time, up until, of course, the big four of Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki and Suzuki then started flooding the market with their faster and lighter and cheaper race bikes. Although these old Griffins still have a cult following of riders who still race these Brit bikes, and this featured example is very tidy indeed. And finally, this was a nice Curtis Honda that I grabbed a few pictures of at the Nostalgia Scramble some time ago. Now, I never got to speak to the actual owner on the day, but I'm sure that this bike was built by Dave Ashworth. And what I do know about the bike is that it was built in 2013 and it has a genuine Curtis Honda frame, and it's not a copy. And this could probably be one of the last frames that was actually built by Brian Curtis. Now, the engine is a 540cc Honda XR 4-stroker, and it has a gas-flowed cylinder head and a mega cycle camshaft and lightened flywheel. Now, it's also got a set of Fox air shocks on the rear, and that exhaust system is a stainless steel custom made affair to fit this particular bike. Now, some of the other parts on this bike, including these front forks, are taken from an 87 CR Honda, and those lovely looking red anodized alloy wheels are a pair of Sun Pro rims. But the paint job on this bike is just exquisite, and that Honda fuel tank is certainly a work of art in its own right. Now, the bike's front and rear hubs are made by Griffin with a twin leading shoe stopper up there on the front, and the frame, as you can see, was also chrome plated. Now, the bike had a custom made seat for this machine, and the workmanship on that fiery red fuel tank is just superb. But apparently this bike had only been ridden a couple of times since it was built, and not long after I snapped these pictures, the bike was advertised for sale at £8,500, but that was a few years ago, so there's a very good chance now that the bike's got a brand new owner. But sadly, I only had access to the one side of this bike because it was parked, as you can see, quite close to a transporter, and I didn't want to actually move it without the owner being in attendance. But I'd loved to have spent more time looking at this superb Honda specimen. Well, I hope you enjoyed that latest selection of bikes from my video archives, and don't forget, if you like what you see, then either hit the like button, or better still, subscribe, or even leave a comment in the appropriate box at the bottom of the video. Okay, coming up in my next posting, we'll be going through the paddock at the 2015 Classic Motocross Donations, and we'll be taking a look at some of those very nice European bikes that were taking part in that 2015 Classic Motocross Donations event that was held at Bennett's Hill. So I do hope you'll all join me for that. So until the next time, everybody stay safe and well until we all get together once again to watch Classic Dirt Bike TV.